Hello, my name's Janet Bruce Brand, and I'm going to be taking you for Micro 2. I think most of you will know me from your macro section of second year. Just as a note, we're going to start with Chapter 11 on monopoly, but before we do that, we're going to recap some of the important concepts on perfect competition. And so it's quite important that you read Chapters 8 and 9 so that you can remember what you did in first year, because that probably feels like an eternity ago. I mean, 2020 already feels like it's taken forever. So please read Chapters 8 and 9 from your textbook. Whilst they're not directly examinable, you do need to know where, for example, perfectly competitive firms profit maximize, etc., as you won't otherwise be able to answer a lot of the questions in this section, even though it's related to newer content. So go through those. Okay, so we then will turn our focus to Chapter 11 on monopoly. But as I said, today we're just going to first recap some essential concepts on perfect competition. So the first couple of sessions, we're looking at various types of market forms and also monopoly outcomes. And this is quite an interesting section because you can apply it a lot to, for example, the South African industrial structure, and we can see where we should be concerned, for example, if firms have too much monopoly power, and we think of the likes of Eskom, etc., and we can even look at COVID and the effects of those certain regulations due to COVID might have influenced monopoly power. I've thought throughout this crisis how interesting it would be from a South African competition policy perspective. Okay, so the outline is that we're going to recap perfect competition, a brief review of the assumptions there. So as I said, read chapters 8 and 9, background reading for this course. And then we start with the new content on monopoly, on price discrimination in chapter 12, oligopolies and monopolistic competition, some strategy, and then we're going to look at South African industrial structure and competition policy and apply this to South Africa and look at what our competition policy is like. So as I say, I think it's quite an interesting section because of the fact that we can apply it. And I'm going to try to apply it as much to our context as possible as we go along. Recall from first year that you get a continuum of market structures. So spectrum ranging from perfect competition at the one extreme, lots of buyers and sellers, through to a pure monopoly on the other extreme, where you've got one seller, okay? And they've got, that seller's obviously therefore got market power. But we find that most fit between these two extremes, okay? Between the two extremes of pure monopoly and perfect competition. So we get monopolistic competition, oligopoly, etc., between those two extreme outcomes. And we're going to study those forms too. Right, to recap some essential concepts, so we can look at the various different types of markets and compare them, is just recall from first year that profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost, okay? Total revenue minus total cost. This little symbols for profit. There is a difference between economic profit and business or accounting profit. I always tease the students and say that the accountants don't know how to work out costs properly, that economists are the only ones who correct where costs and profit are concerned. And whilst I say this and I'm teasing, economists take a broader view of costs. So accountants will take your out-of-pocket, your direct or explicit costs, whereas economists take into account not only those, they also add in the opportunity costs. So for instance, not just what is the cost of the water and electricity, etc. for a business, but what else could you have been doing with those resources or with your time as opposed to running that business? What could you have been earning? And so, therefore, economic profit will be looking at your total revenue minus your total cost, and seeing if you are making if you're making anything over and above that. If your total revenue is exactly equal to total cost, you're breaking even from an economic perspective, and we call that normal profit. It's a strange term because in actual fact you are breaking even from an economic perspective because you've included all your opportunity costs. Accountants would say that you actually at that position are making an accounting profit because they don't include opportunity costs. But when total revenue is equal to total costs, including all your economic costs and your opportunity costs, we say you're breaking even from an economic perspective or earning normal profit. As I say, accountants would say you were all earning profit. If you make any additional profit over and above this, we would therefore call that economic profit. Okay. Right. Your output rules, and these are really important. Firms are going to set output, obviously, where they maximize their profit, where your total profit curve, if you like, where it hits a peak. In maths, if you took the first derivative of that total profit function, you'd get the marginal profit, and where that's equal to 0, that would be where you'd maximize profit. You don't need to know that, but it corresponds with the maximum point of your total profit curve. What you do, however, need to know is this golden rule. I call it the golden rule in economics, which is that all firms set output, all firms profit maximize where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, what's the marginal extra revenue you get by producing one more unit, where it's equal to the marginal cost of producing that unit. Now, this is so important that I say to my students, I call it the amnesia rule, okay? And I joke around with them and say, well, if you were hit over the head and you forgot everything else and you went into an exam or a test and you're sitting with the diagram and you think, oh no, I can't remember anything, you can remember Janet's amnesia rule, that where do you start with that diagram? Where do all firms operate? Where they set output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, hence the amnesia rule. Furthermore, there's a shutdown rule, and the shutdown rule, if you want to recall it, is you compare average revenue, you can write this down, average revenue with average variable cost to see whether a firm is going to stay open or shut down. Compare average revenue with average variable cost. This will make more sense to you just now when I go through it. But basically, a firm will shut down if it can reduce losses by doing so. If a firm's already making losses and you find that not only is it's not covering its fixed costs, and therefore it might not even be covering its variable costs. If you shut down, you're at least going to avoid the variable costs, your electricity and water, for instance. So if your average revenue, the price you're receiving, is lower than your average variable costs, then it pays you to shut down. Okay, we'll go through this as we go along. So let's talk about perfect competition and how it impacts us from a welfare point of view. Recall that equilibrium in a perfect competition is determined where market supply and demand intersect. Okay, so let's just get the pen here. Okay. Right, so I don't know why Loom keeps having this little highlighting bubble, but anyway, if your market demand intersects your market supply, remember you've got price and quantity on your axes. So this is for the market. Where these two intersect, okay, you're going to get your equilibrium price and quantity. So this is the market here. Let's label it market. All right. On your right-hand side, we can draw the demand curve, therefore, that an individual firm faces. Remember that there are lots and lots of different sellers. So an individual firm is small, and it's going to have to take this price as determined in the market as given. And at that price, it faces a perfectly elastic or a horizontal demand curve. I hope that some of this is coming back to you and that you don't have amnesia as well where this is concerned. Okay. So there here's your market price. Okay. Let's call it PC for competition. Okay. Little C there. Okay, so this is your price. And the individual firm, this is an individual, okay, faces this perfectly elastic, sorry, it's not easy to write here. This is the individual firm, okay. It faces this horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve, and we find that the price that it has to charge, as determined by the market, is equal to average revenue, which I'm sure you've forgotten what average revenue is, but I'm going to remind you, and it's also equal to marginal revenue. That's actually only for perfect competition, okay? It's equal to all of these things. Now let's remember why. And two further points is that in the short run, it's possible for perfectly competitive firms to make an economic profit or a loss. However, in the long run, because there's freedom of entry and exit, there are no barriers to entry, other firms can come in if they're making a profit, and you'll find that this shifts the supply curve and individual firms go back to just breaking even or earning what we call normal profit, zero economic profit in the long run, okay? Let's recall why this is the case. Okay, so I usually take an example of perfect competition with getting students to think about Warwick Triangle in Durban, where near the taxi rank you've got lots and lots of fruit and vegetable sellers and lots of consumers there. So if you think about the assumption, large number of buyers and sellers, no one individual can influence the market price, so they're price takers. So they, as I say, so think of your fruit and veggie sellers selling a product that's more or less homogeneous or identical. There are no barriers to entry. Nobody just say, well, you're not allowed to come and sell here. There's complete information about the price charge, so you can walk around and see what other sellers are selling their product at. Consumers can also walk around and ascertain that information with very low transaction costs of doing so or of setting up. Now, in reality, we're never going to reach the extreme of perfect, tick every single criterion, okay, meet it. But we'll come close, like with that example, you come close to that. But you might find that, for example, your product's not completely identical. There may be barriers to entry, like the mayor could come along and say, hey, have you given me something in order for me to issue you a license to operate, for a vendor to operate? So you might find this in the real world. But if you want to think about perfect competition, think about that example where most of those assumptions are met. Okay, so because an individual firm faces this horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve, and I said that the price there is equal to average revenue, okay? And price is actually equal to average revenue for all firms. So you could actually write here, next to this rule here, price is equal to average revenue, you can write down that this is for all firms, okay? They're not just perfect competition. Price is actually equal to average revenue by definition. I'm going to show you why. If you recall from first year, this is a case for all firms, that average revenue is equal to total revenue over output. To work out your average revenue, take your total revenue divided by the amount you're producing, your output, and that gives you average revenue. Okay, so average revenue is simply your total, working out an average, your total revenue divided by output. Okay? But recall from first year that total revenue is also equal to price times quantity. Most of you know that. So if your price is 5 and you sell 10 units, your total revenue is 50. And if you rearrange this and you made P the subject of the formula, you divide the right-hand side by Q to get rid of it, and you therefore have to divide the left-hand side by Q. You'd find rearranging that the above, you find that rearranging this thing, you find that price is equal to total revenue over quantity. But that's exactly what average revenue is equal to. So therefore, price and average revenue are, by definition, the same thing. Okay, So price is equal to average revenue by definition and for all firms. And that is a very important thing to remember, because in future I'm going to say to you, remember that price is equal to average revenue by definition. Okay. This top rule is only for perfect competition. Only for perfect competition, however, that you find that price is equal to marginal revenue. You find that this thing. Okay. Recall, what is marginal revenue? It's the change in total revenue over the change in output. In other words, if you wanted your marginal revenue be, if you want to sell one more unit, your change in Q is 1. We usually always take, when we're looking at something at the margin, we take one more of it. So what's your marginal revenue? If you increase your output by one more unit, what is the extra revenue that you'll get as a result? So for example, over here, say we go from 1 to 2 units. Okay, so your delta Q is 1. Gone from 1 to 2 units. Delta Q is 1. What will your change in revenue be? What will this thing be? Well, it's simply going to be equal to the price, because if your quantity is 1, whatever your change in revenue is simply going to be given by the price, and that's actually constant. So if you go from 1 to 2, or you go from 2 to 3 units, okay, each time increasing by 1 unit, delta Q is 1. You find the change in revenues, total revenue is the same each time. It's just you sell one more unit, the extra revenue you get is simply the price you get. If it's R5 and you sell one more unit, if you go from 1 to 2 units, you get the extra revenue you get is 5. If you go from 2 to 3 units, you sell one more unit, the extra revenue you get is 5. Okay, so only for perfect competition, because you face this horizontal demand curve, if you sell one more unit, the extra revenue you get is simply equal to the price. And so for perfect competition, not only is price equal to average revenue, as is the case for all firms, but uniquely for perfect competition, price is also equal to marginal revenue. Okay. To remind you from first year. And then, as I said, this is the crucial profit maximizing condition, the amnesia rule. You put marginal revenue, which you've worked out here, marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. And that's where a firm will maximize, and a perfectly competitive firm will maximize its profit. Marginal cost simply equal to the change in total cost over the change in output from first year. A marginal cost curve is the same as your supply curve. It shows you all the points, how much firms will supply, given their cost at those points, above the minimum point of your average variable cost curve. We'll talk about that now. So above your shutdown point, above that, that'll give you your supply curve. Okay, let's have a look at this. This is the type of diagram you would have seen in first year. Okay, it's figure 8.5 from your textbook, and it says how the profit maximizing quantity varies with price. So let's start off by saying that a firm faces a price which we know is equal to average revenue by definition for all firms, and it's also equal to marginal revenue for perfect competition, which we're looking at. Okay, let's say that's given as, in our example, as 6 Rand. It's dollars here, so we'll take $6. Okay, it's equal to 6. So where do we begin? We're given a diagram. Where do we begin? Amnesia rule. Okay, we put marginal revenue in each case equal to marginal cost to see the firm's profit maximizing output. Okay, so if price is given as 6, we know that's also equal to marginal revenue is 6. Okay, so we can take the firm's facing a horizontal demand curve. It's like this is the demand curve it's facing. Okay, this is very difficult to draw straight, yeah, but anyway, okay, so that's like its price and its marginal revenue, etc. Okay, marginal revenue, right? So where's it going? And this upward sloping, this red line is the supply curve is the same as its marginal cost curve. Okay, so if you're going to put, you want to put Marginal revenue given by the horizontal line, because marginal revenue is equal to price is equal to 6. You put this horizontal line equal to your upward sloping marginal cost curve. So MC equals MR, and it's going to occur at this point here where they intersect at E2, and you determine your profit maximizing output, and it would be 140 units. Okay, so, okay, sorry, I just see my mouse was frozen for a second. Okay, right. It is therefore operating here, profit maximizing output of 140, price 6, etc. The next thing that you do, so rule number 1 is you put marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, and you determine your profit maximizing output. Rule number 2 is that you need to compare average revenue with average total cost to see if it's making a profit or a loss. So let me write this down for you, and you can actually make a note of these very important points I'm giving you. Number 1 is you look at profit maximizing output. You put marginal revenue equals to marginal cost, your amnesia rule. Okay, and you find the profit maximizing output. Okay, profit. Okay, profit maximizing output. Right. Number 2, you compare, and you write it out in full, you compare average revenue, compare it to average total cost. Average total cost to see whether it's making a profit or a loss. Okay, so you're going to compare that. Profit or a loss. Okay. Often your diagram is not labeled ATC, it's just labeled AC, as is in the case here, if you look here. So there, you could actually include like an arrow up there and call it ATC, average total cost. Often they don't, as I say, put it in. So number 2 is you need to compare, I'll write this here, not that it's easy to do so, but you compare average revenue to average total cost to see if it's making a profit or loss. And the third thing that you do, okay, is to compare average revenue with average variable cost. So I'm giving you a summary of these chapters really. Compare average revenue to average variable cost to see whether it's going to shut down. Average variable cost, and that is your shutdown rule. Okay, so let's put this into practice. That's the shutdown rule. Shutdown rule. Okay. All right. So at this point here, at E2, we've put MR, this horizontal line, equal to MC, and we find that the profit maximizing output is 140. We've done the first tick. Secondly, we need to compare average revenue to average total cost to see if it's making a profit or a loss. So average revenue is also given by the horizontal line. It's also 6. And you compare that with average total cost. That's the green line, which is also 6, exactly equal to 6 at that point. So we find that it's actually breaking even from an economic perspective, or earning what we call normal profit. It's breaking even. Therefore, we know it's obviously going to, it's not going to shut down, because you can see that the price or average revenue is above average variable cost. You could read it off. Average variable cost is about 5.4 or something. So your price, average revenue, is above your average variable cost at this profit maximizing level of output. And so it's going to stay open, okay, breaking even. What happens if the price changed? So instead of being 6, what happens if it changed to $7, okay? What would you do? You take this horizontal line then at 7, that would be your price equals average revenue equals marginal revenue of 7, and you put it equal to your upward sloping marginal cost curve, and you'd find that where the MR intersects your MC is at E3. okay? And it determines your profit maximizing level of output. And therefore, at that output, once you've always found your profit maximizing output, you compare at that output your average revenue, etc., to average total cost. So at 215, if MR equals MC, your average revenue is given by 7, okay, by this horizontal line. But what is your average total cost? Average total cost is down here at 6 point something. So your average revenue, given by as 7 by this blue line here, is greater at the profit maximizing level of output. It's greater than this green, where the green line is, it's greater than your average total cost. So it's making a profit, okay, an economic profit. It's certainly going to stay open because, again, your price is obviously therefore also greater than your average variable cost. All right. And then to look at the shutdown rule, we'll consider what would happen if your price drops to $5. So now the perfectly competitive firm would face a price equal to $5, which is it'll face a perfectly elastic demand curve, and that $5 is also equal to average revenue and marginal revenue. So putting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, this blue line equal to your upward sloping MC curve, you get this level of output where they intersect, okay, MR equals MC here. Comparing then, first thing, at this level of output, once you found it, compare your average revenue with average total cost. Well, your average revenue is 5, but your average total cost is right up there at like 7. So your average total cost is greater than your average revenue. So you're actually making a loss, okay, like $2 per unit there. Your average at this profit maximizing level of output, your average reading off the green line, your average total cost is 7, but your average revenue is only 5. You're making a loss. Furthermore, at this level of output, profit maximizing level, you'd compare your average revenue of 5 to your average variable cost, that's the purple line, and you find that they're exactly equal. Okay, and at that point we're kind of indifferent between staying open and shutting down. However, if the price were to fall any lower than 5, you definitely would shut down, because if it was lower, you'd find that your average revenue would be below this purple line, below your variable costs, and therefore you should shut down, and you can avoid some of those variable costs like water and electricity. Because if you can't even cover those, there's no ways you could contribute towards your fixed costs. And that's why we find the marginal cost curve becomes dotted, and we don't consider it as the supply curve then, because the firm wouldn't operate then. Your output becomes 0. Okay. At any point below this point here associated with E1. All right, so that's a recap of first year. And recall your shape of your cost curves are determined by that law of diminishing marginal returns. Okay. So, competitive industry, the industry is the price maker, it sets the price, where market demand intersects market supply, price determined, that price is then given to individual firms, they're the price takers, and they therefore face, as we said, perfectly elastic demand curve there, and that price equal to average revenue and marginal revenue, as I've showed you. Where does it operate? Where MC equals MR, given by this horizontal line, there, that's your profit maximizing output. And as I said to you, you compare your average revenue with your average total cost at this level, at the profit maximizing level, and you see here that average revenue is above your average total cost, so it's making supernormal profits. It's making economic profits, in other words. It's not just breaking even. And if this were to be the case, if it is making profits, the individual firms, this is a trigger, it's an incentive for other firms to enter the industry. And so your industry supply curve is going to shift to the right. There's going to be an increase in supply. And what's going to happen to the price? You can see that the price is going to fall as a result. Let's look at this over the page. You did this in first year. You see that your supply curve has shifted to the right, the price has fallen, okay? And this means that individual firms face a lower price. They've got to face a perfectly elastic demand curve now at this lower price. So they'd put the MR given by this horizontal line equal to MC, and they'd now produce actually a lower output than before. And if you compare average revenue given by this horizontal line at P1 with average total cost, they're just equal at this point. The red line that I've drawn here just intersects the green here, just breaking even, and we call that normal profit in the long run. Okay, and therefore there's no incentive, there'll be no more entry and exit, no incentive for firms to enter or exit. Okay, all right. So there are two consequences of this, if you like, from a welfare perspective, and this is going to be quite important because we're therefore going to compare different market forms and say which is more efficient, etc., and also look at price discrimination when firms do this and see how it affects your welfare as a consumer. So this is why we teach you these concepts. The first concept that we look at is the concept of allocative efficiency, and that is that perfectly competitive firms charge a price equal to marginal cost. Okay? In other words, they charge a price just equal to the marginal additional cost of producing that thing. So that's highly efficient from a societal point of view, where you charge a price just equal to the cost, the marginal, the extra cost of making it, including all opportunity costs, obviously. We also find, so if you have a look at this, you see that, and why is that the case? Remember that all firms profit maximize where MR is equal to MC, but we know that in perfect competition, MR is also equal to P, therefore we find that price is also equal to this whole thing, so price equals the marginal cost of producing that item. We have allocative efficiency. Furthermore, you can see from this diagram that perfectly competitive firms in the long run, we saw when they break even, and there's no incentive for firms to enter or exit, they're in long run equilibrium, they're operating actually at the minimum point of this green line, of the average total cost curve. So that's also highly efficient from a production point of view. Okay? So perfectly competitive firms are allocatively efficient. They charge a price just equal to marginal cost. The value of the last unit exchange equals the opportunity cost of producing it. And you're using your capital where you're moving it to its highest valued use. They also achieve productive efficiency because they operate at a point where you're just at the minimum of the long run average cost curve. And so that's very efficient from a production point of view. So they achieve both those things. We also find that welfare is maximized under perfect competition, why consumers love it. And in the long run, they're going to earn normal profit or break even from an economic perspective. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to monopoly, but I hope that you have, that most of this has come back to you. If it hasn't, and even if it has come back to you, please make sure that you do review and recap chapters 8 and 9 before we proceed with this.